Hello, everyone. So welcome to the last panel. And I'll just start shooting away the questions. So the first question is, how do you explain the value proposition of blockchain to whoever you're talking to? Like, why are you in it? And then I'll ask you, what drew you in the first place into it? So who wants to go first?
Shall I start? Okay, well, the value proposition of blockchains has a lot of different aspects. But for me, the personal one is actually fairly easy to get across, and especially for this audience, I am sure it will resonate. I come from a family that, like many people around the world, ended up having to wake up one morning, and they were told that they had to leave. They had to leave the place that they had lived in for about 500 years. And that morning, they left the breakfast on the table, and ever since, my grandmother always lamented that the breakfast was there, and we always were looking at her like, Grandma, you also left the table, you left the house. Every single thing they had to be left behind. The entire system that had built around asset custody, and the entire system that went back hundreds of years, and before then was based on the Roman Empire, and before then was based on other techniques of, or rather a long history of record keeping, was wiped clean. And I know how she would have felt if she would have been able to keep at least a little bit of her assets on a little thumb drive, which of course had not been invented at the time, about 100 years ago. So that for me is the personal side of this. The disintermediation, the lack of entities that we have to trust is the selling point. There are many of you that I'm sure came to crypto from an anti-state point of view. I'm not exactly one of those. I believe that one of the biggest concerns that at least I have are corporations that have a profit motive for doing all sorts of malfeasance. And we saw some of these failures with FTX. And the fact that programmable assets enable us to cut out these intermediaries, to build better ways of custody, to curtail what other people can do with our assets is one of the huge selling points for me. And that, I think, is the main reason why I'm here.
Yeah, so for me, there's one answer to all of those questions, and it's a sort of restatement of what you just said. Throughout history, there have been vulnerabilities in bad systems, but we are at a moment in time where we're facing extreme complexity. We're facing situations where single solitary actors or small groups are able to project catastrophic power, and a lot of the difficulties are as a result of failed coordination mechanisms. So we need to effect a paradigm shift in order to survive and thrive as a species, as a planet. And so if you're in a village, you can coordinate you can trust amongst meet space, peer-to-peer interactions. If you want to do great things, you need to have sophisticated coordination mechanisms. Our only solution up until say, Satoshi's white paper has been top-down command and control coordination mechanisms, and those things enable us to do amazing things, and they also have tremendous vulnerabilities. They're actually, in many cases, quite dangerous. And so we have the ability to do much better. Decentralized protocols were invented, and we've been spending years building enabling infrastructure. We have built increasingly decentralized new trust foundation for the planet that has enabled the development of decentralized finance, which is really the democratization of finance, similar to how the web democratized access to information, ability to publish information, and more things that we built on the web. And we're seeing an early projection of our technology into mainstream culture, and that has been with the NFT phenomenon. So we build enabling infrastructure, enabling modules for years, and we're finally becoming relevant to brands. For millennia, the top-down command and control trust mechanisms have been imbued by authorities, imbuing trust and authority into intermediaries, and that's how the world operates. You've got a lot of intermediaries that manage centralized databases. The centralized databases organize who owns what, who has what rights and what responsibilities. And now with this incursion of our technology into mainstream culture, we're seeing an economic sector see real disintermediation. So content creators, content owners are now able to access their consumers, their fans, without the help of intermediaries, record companies and other sorts of entities. And so what we're going to see going forward, hopefully, is the intermediaries in many different sectors being targeted or essentially right-sized so that they exert less power and extract less value. Intermediation is a great thing, but it needs to be right-sized. And so we are effectively taking the trust vector that we've lived under, and which has been a top-down trust vector, and we're flipping it upside down, and we've invented a new kind of trust, decentralized trust.
I'm gonna horribly abuse my role as moderator and also answer some of the questions. So my answer to the value proposition of blockchain is that many of the social functions used to be solved in a peer-to-peer way. So our reputation, when people lived in villages or small towns, you had to ask around. Money was peer-to-peer up till a few decades ago. And now all of this has been misappropriated and converted through the digital world into something that is curated by big companies or by governments. And that's not good. And blockchain shows a way to keep all the good things about the digital network, but making things like money, reputation, social networks, peer-to-peer again, as they should be and as they have been for millennia. So the next question is, what drew you into, how did you, what was the moment or the thing that made you say, aha, I need to get in there, think back in time, and if you can describe your mindset. And of course, Joe, you sisaw Ethereum very early, and of course you made a big bet there that was, changed all of our lives and yours. And Professor Sirer, you were an academic, right, writing brilliant papers. All of a sudden you ditch that and go elsewhere. So let's start with you, Joe. What
Sure.
was your
So
mindset?
I have been a technologist for a long time and also spent time in the world of finance, and it was essentially impossible for me to miss it. I'd done work on a software project that introduced me to public key cryptography, and so in early 2011, I was introduced to blockchain. It was called Bitcoin back then, and for about 3 years, I read everything, but felt like the industry was immature, and that I followed and appreciated projects in the space, but I thought that they were likely not going to be mature enough or sturdy enough to survive. And so I didn't jump in and work in the industry, but I was lucky enough to meet Vitalik on the first day of 2014. Read his white paper that night and stayed connected to that early group of people, and it formed itself into a project, and I stayed very close to the project, or helped build the project for about a year, and when we were getting close to launching version 1 of the network, I started Consensys to work on building out infrastructure.
Weren't you deterred or daunted by, Ethereum in the early days, there was this young, very brilliant, well, he was a kid. He's still pretty young, but and there was a lot of mess around it, the Kryptonians and whatnot. You weren't, but you saw through it. So like, you weren't daunted?
I saw the power of the technology when I read the Bitcoin white paper. I got it pretty instantly, and I was pretty certain that this was going to change everything because it's such a powerful idea, new trust foundation. I thought that it would take a very long time. I thought because it was the Bitcoin virtual machine, a fourth-like virtual machine, and I felt like we were going to have to build layers of software bit by bit. I thought it would be very complicated. Vitalik's vision was essentially that at every node of these peer-to-peer networks, you could put a fully computationally expressive Turing machine. So that immediatit in my mind, accelerated the potential. And yeah, it was a group of so it was more builders than crypto anarchists, because Bitcoin was the crypto anarchist space. There were some crypto anarchists, but mostly it was software developers that were attracted to it. And it was certainly fringe, because you don't affect a revolution or a paradigm shift from inside a bank or inside a government. And so, yeah, of course, there were a lot of different opinions. There were socialists and anarchists, and it's everything in between. But if it wasn't that way, if it was a startup that went to a VC, there's no way that Ethereum would have caught on in the same broad, decentralized way.
So again, Professor Sirer, why leave the comfort of the ivory tower and a spectacular research career in an Ivy League university for all of this mess?
So let's see. My journey was actually very straightforward. I read the Bitcoin paper, and I'm sure a lot of you had the same reaction. I remember that moment of reading that paper and being deeply affected by, oh my God, this is a totally new way of doing something called Consensys. And until then, we had studied Consensys in graduate school, we had taught it, etc. And suddenly there was an entirely new way of approaching it. And by making that consensus process probabilistic, Satoshi achieved something amazing. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is really brilliant. Now, I had worked on cryptocurrencies before. In fact, I have a paper from 2002 called Karma that has proof of work minting in it. So I had been in that space, and I had half the idea that Satoshi had, but he ended up folding in the consensus process into proof of work, which was the next brilliant move. So I did what any academic would do.
Are you Satoshi?
No, I'm not Satoshi at all, no. I did what any academic would do, which is as soon as I saw this, I flipped to the end of the paper and checked to see if he cited my work, and of course he hadn't. So then after that came the work with Professor Itai Eyal of Technion on figuring out whether Bitcoin, the claimed properties of Bitcoin were true, or to try to characterize its security properties better. And then a bunch of work on trying to improve decentralization, trying to improve scalability. And that led us to the Avalanche protocol, which I believe is to be the third new approach to consensus. That is not based on proof of work, but ends up again making the whole process probabilistic and gains an amazing advantage, a performance advantage as a result. So that's how I ended up. Along the way, one of the things that kept me in this space was maybe two things. It's so entertaining. There is always some craziness going on in crypto, and I thought I also had a special edge in that there was a lot of fraud, and I thought I had a good fraud detector as well, and it was fun. And of course, the technical approaches. I ended up getting involved in the DAO hack by foreseeing some of the weaknesses that the DAO hacker exploited. So it was really fun, and it kept me going. And ultimately, I decided, okay, it's time to step in and to bring in some heavy machinery, some new work from academia into the space.
So hearing how the two of you got into it because you read the white paper and now regret not reading the white paper. Actually, when asked to read it several times, I actually didn't. Maybe if I had early enough, I would have, had more insight into it.
You're doing okay.
Late bloomer. More than 14 years have passed since the Bitcoin white paper was released, for those who read it at the time. And usage, is still kind of low. So like, what's blocking growth? When will it grow? What are we waiting for?
So I would argue that usage is remarkably good, that this revolution has proceeded quite rapidly. The first thing that could be called a programmable computer was the Jacquard loom around 1800, so 220 years ago. There, Babbage and Ada Lovelace and all the different iterations of computing machines with different technology, those were really hard to program. Those are really hard to develop a community with expertise around. So I think we're going astonishingly quickly in this compute paradigm, where we're essentially building the Star Trek computer that's always on and that's always responsive and is managing lots of systems eventually. We'll get there. And I think it would be impossible and bad if things move too quickly. So having 20 transactions per second for a few years makes certain kinds of use cases economically viable, and many other use cases have to go to either centralized cargo cult type blockchains or just wait until things are ready, like high frequency gaming, things like that. So if people use Avalanche, or as people use layer 2s and layer 3s that have hundreds and thousands of transactions per second, app chains, niche chains, community chains, we're going to make so many more use cases economically viable at the right time, and we'll draw in the people when usability, scalability, security, and use cases are there. We're just, I think, moving into a time when we've built enough enabling infrastructure so that real business can get done on blockchain, on layer 2s, et cetera, and the companies are coming.
Okay. I just started worrying because you mentioned that we're building this computer that never shuts down and always operating, but we all know that when a computer, there's only one way to fix your computer when it really acts up, right? We all know it, right? You just turn it off, you count to 10, and you turn it on, and you pray. So if we have a computer that we can never turn off, it's kind of daunting. Emin, what about you? What do you think is blocking more adoption and usage of blockchain?
Great question. So first of all, I think let me start as Joe did by noting that we've made tremendous progress. I no longer have to explain what cryptocurrencies are to most of the people that I speak to. I just say, have you heard of Bitcoin? They always say yes. And then I say, well, Avalanche is like Bitcoin, and they get the point. Politicians understand what this thing is. And then asset managers understand that crypto assets are a new asset type. And so we've established, I think, the foundation. We have also the custodial solutions and so forth for traditional finance institutions to get into this space. So that's an amazing foundation. What's holding us back? First of all, scale was holding us back. And scalability was very, very difficult to achieve. Fast chains, quick time to finality is still very, very difficult to achieve. I'm proud of what Avalanche has done. We've moved the needle in terms of how much time it takes from you interacting with something and that thing becoming immutable. And I think we've built the fastest solution on that front. And there are people using Avalanche now who don't realize that it's actually a blockchain. They think it's a centralized service somehow. They're interacting with a website, but in reality, behind the scenes, they're actually interacting with the chain. Second issue is complexity of the user interfaces. And I think we're going to see, we're seeing the layer 1 wars or what have you at the moment, and we're going to see some clear winners emerge on that front. But the fight will move on to the front ends. And so the front ends to these things, the wallets, they leave much to be desired. They're very hard to use for ordinary people, and that has kept us back. So combined, that has kept a lot of people, especially outside of the West, from using DeFi. And I think it's time for us to reach out and allow people to participate with simpler user interfaces, lower gas fees. And the third and final thing is the notion of architectures that allow dApps to be isolated from each other. So we haven't seen enough of this yet, but with subnets on Avalanche, people can create different chains dedicated to use cases that wherein one dApp will not have to high fees just because another dApp is popular. That you as a company can build a solution and have predictability over your gas fees, about your congestion, and so forth. And if I may be off by one, I will add a fourth problem that's actually keeping us back, and that is trust in custodians. So, as we all know, I think it's impossible to discuss anything in this space without mentioning FTX at least a few times. Custodians fail.
The F word.
The F word. So custodians fail, that's what they do. And we need solutions for that. We need people, like all of us, I even myself cannot trust a centralized custodian. And we need solutions for this. And partly at Ava Labs, one of the things we've been doing is using trusted enclave solutions to build trustworthy exchanges. And we built enclave.markets to essentially forestall the kind of malfeasance that we saw on FTX. So with trustworthy exchanges, an easier to use user interface with dedicated app chains and a fast consensus protocol, I think we're going to be able to enroll a much bigger audience to blockchains.
Thanks. So, you know, crypto is, of course, a space that keeps on surprising us always. Like, yeah. So my next question is, what were the things that surprised you most? And what are those things that you pride yourself for actually seeing or getting right?
Sure. So I said it already, but I think the thing that surprises me most is the pace of adoption. When this all started, I expected that there'd be a lot of resistance by entrenched actors, governments, bankers, etc. And we see a lot of that, but there are a lot of people in the community, a lot of consumers, a lot of politicians and regulators and business leaders, even bankers, that get it. I think unless you have a real agenda that you're trying to protect, once you understand the principles of the technology, you see that there are good reasons to incorporate it in what you're doing, or you root for adoption. And so I predicted, so quietly, internally, years ago, that there'd be a clash of civilizations. Essentially the civilization based on centralized trust, top-down command and control, and the emerging paradigm shift civilization based on decentralized trust, essentially moving from the age of silos and exploitation to a new age of communities and collaboration. So been very happy to see that we are in the middle of, and it's heating up, of that clash of civilizations, and I think we have a good shot of seeing it go well. I think we're going to land. It's going to take years still, but I think we're going to land these technologies so that they help clean up centralized systems and help to re-architect much of the world's systems eventually on better, sounder foundations. The thing that I think I'm reasonably good at is seeing process and flows, feedback loops, reflexivity. And I think that's a good thing in our ecosystem. It's a necessary thing in our ecosystem because I see sort of the longer term vision. I look around and there are many people like that. There are many other people that have a very static view of what's going on and panic when they see something they don't like and complain when they see something they don't like and rail against it on Twitter and other places. And so hopefully more people will take a more process-oriented view.
Emin, so what did surprise you most? What surprised you most, and what do you pride yourself for getting right?
Great question. So I agree with Joe in that the rate of adoption really was flabbergasting. So I used to be an operating systems researcher before I was a distributed systems researcher, and the rate of adoption for operating systems is about 10 to 20 years. So we would do work. The work I did in the 90s is barely now finding its way into modern OSs. So I was used to that, and I'm used to academic conferences where we would discuss how we would speed up distributed systems adoption or industry interest in this space. And now we're operating at a time when the white papers are barely getting called off the printer before somebody jumps on them and there's a company or a business plan associated with them. So that has been an amazing process. Now, to be fair, there's a flip side to this, which is, if there is a large enough speculator community, they can take any great idea and turn it into a speculation tool. They can turn it into something that has, some kind of a positronic scheme to it, because people are buying something only to sell it, etc. And that's the dirty side of this. So I don't necessarily love bull markets that much. They just create too much noise and don't allow the technically strong projects to shine through. It's a double-edged sword, but I was shocked and surprised at how fast adoption cycles are. The thing I take pride in, I would say the subnet architecture. So we foresaw that the world would be moving away from Bitcoin, which is a single asset, single chain. It would move towards Ethereum-like systems, which are multi-asset, single chain, and ultimately to systems like Avalanche, which are multi-asset, multi-chain. And I think we made the right call there, and I'm super excited about how fast other people are adopting subnets and issuing their dApps on their own dedicated chains and finding additional use cases for their coins.
Just want to jump in there and share that Metropolitan Ethereum is very modular, very layered, and multi-chain.
Yeah, I'll just say that I'll add that I'm surprised by pretty much everything in blockchain. Like, don't understand much of it, Crypto kitties,
Rocks.
Do you own an NFT?
What?
Do you own an NFT?
I don't think, maybe a POAP, because like
Counts.
someone asked me, said, here's a cool thing, and
Was it paper?
A what?
Was it paper?
No, it's an app on my phone, so
Okay.
I have a POAP, I think.
We
Actually,
have to send you some NFTs. Joe
What?
and I have to send you some NFTs. It sounds
Okay, let's talk business afterwards. And yeah, so like NFT, yeah, that's another thing, NFTs and a whole bunch of other things. Yeah. So, next question. 20 years out, how does the world of crypto look? Are there still national fiat currencies of any sort? Are there still cryptocurrencies?
So, I think it's going to be a very exciting 20 years. Of course, everything will be digital. Just look at the sort of extrapolate from everything that we know and just bring it out. This is the age of digital first. Many of you, especially the younger folks in the audience, are always mobile first, digital first. So you're born with the phones, and we are, now people are born with phones in their hands these days. That digitization will extend itself to every asset. There's about 700 trillion worth of assets out there. These are actual existing assets, not even considering the new asset types that we're going to be creating. NFTs and so forth are not in that 700T. And our space sum total is less than 1 trillion right now. So there is a lot of assets which will be digitized. And that transformation is going to be amazing. National fiat currencies will of course be digital. They already are digital, but they're going to be on blockchains. And there are so many forces at work, especially outside the US, for all sorts of securities to be digitized because their reach is all of a sudden much larger. So let's get used to it from the get-go. This is unstoppable, it's coming, and that digitization means a tremendous growth opportunity for the chains and systems that can absorb that growth. And we're all in the business of building that infrastructure. I'm very, very excited about what is to come on that front.
Yeah, so 20 years is a long way away, the way things are accelerating. And I think we're going to be fully into the paradigm shift. I think we'll see a revolution in how the world organizes itself. I do believe that centralization is a great thing, being able to coordinate vertically, but it's also brittle and it's exploitable, et cetera. And so I think that we're going to add horizontal coordination mechanisms to vertical coordination mechanisms, and that's going to enable, under vertical mechanisms, people, in order to do great things, they gather capital or political power or labor, and they tend to, let's call it exploit that different kind of capital. And they create new value from that, and they hang on to that new value in a tight silo, and they neglect to distribute that value broadly from whence it came. And so we'll see automated distribution mechanisms of new value. We'll see much broader real-time participation in the form of taking roles transparently, explicitly, making proposals in governance systems, voting on proposals in governance systems. So there'll certainly be a lot of AI, but ignoring how that's going to affect things, I think we're going to see the fundamental unit of coordination, action, political power being smaller communities, and we'll see smaller communities organize themselves into communities of communities. And these things will have that cross-cutting vertical, horizontal governance mechanism so that there's just much broader economic and political agency. And ideally, the nation state continues, takes care of what it needs to take care of, and smaller focused organizations can define their own goals, raise their own capital, and execute their vision. Will there be nation states? Absolutely. For as long as we're living together, we're going to need that sort of coordination. And nation states are communities of communities. Communities need tokens to organize their activities, to identify who owns what, who has what rights, and as Gun said, of course, nation states will issue their own tokens when token.
Okay. So we have a few minutes left, so I guess maybe we can have questions from the audience while we'll maybe, if someone can...
There's a microphone here.
There's a microphone here, so if someone wants, maybe we'll...
Throw it out.
Meanwhile, I'll ask you, and then I'll pass the microphone, and I'll start. Like, what's the craziest or funniest thing you can share on stage that you experience in blockchain space? I'll start with one that, craziest I can share here. I was once pitched to participate, support. This was in the crazy ICO days of early 2017. I was pitched to participate in, of course, an ICO and support it. Something about it was like a new security paradigm where the premise was that what secures your, whatever it is a drop of blood that they take your DNA sequence and it's safe for security. And I said, oh, it sounds, why do you need an ICO? It sounds like you just have maybe a better security way, but the whole world is moving to fingerprints and so on. So the person pitching it to me said, yeah, but fingerprint doesn't really give you any security because I can come and I can chop off your finger and then I have your DNA sequence, and then I have your fingerprint. He said, well, if you chop off my finger, you also have a drop of blood there, right? So didn't end up supporting that. So
there are so many crazy stories. I don't know where to begin, and some of them you just have to save in case you need to bargain with people and say, hey, let me reveal this to you in exchange for something else. But one of the early fun things that I did was host a big workshop at Cornell University, where with Vitalik, Vlad, and others were there for programming in Solidity on the EVM. And then everyone's doing something, of course. And I came up with a game, and I'll tell you how the game was, and maybe some of you will recognize it. So I wrote this code for essentially the following. You start out with an address that has some, you can think of it as a box. There's a box, there's $1 in it, and you can buy the dollar, or you can get to own it, if you are the last person to put a penny into the box. And every time you put a penny, the duration of how long you have to put another penny is extended a little bit. So you put 1 penny, and now if nobody does anything, you're going to end up owning the dollar. Of course, the rational thing to do is to put 99 pennies in, because then, of course, you're going to get the dollar. But of course, the way the human psychology works is if I'm putting 99 cents, and Joe has also put in 99 cents, suddenly there's $3 in the box now, and we start realizing, hey, this is going to, you have the incentive to add more and more and more. And I remember chatting with again, the crew there, and Professor Itai Eyal was there, Vitalik was there, Vlad was there, and I remember Professor Eyal looking at me and saying, you're going to own all the ether. and I thought, okay, well, this is, it's borderline a scammy thing. And I thought, okay, I can't do this. I can't release this smart contract by myself under my name. It's bad for me. But then someone else did this. FOMO 3D came about, those of you who remember, ultimately ended up collecting millions of dollars in one address. And then again, ultimately somebody bribed a miner to collect the entire winnings. It was just a fun afternoon thing, and it was great. It's like crypto is full of these things.
Ponzi games. Yeah. So
Not a Ponzi, technically not.
Ponzi games.
No, it's not a Ponzi game.
No.
It's a dollar auction.
Okay, cool. So I'm completely desensitized to crazy at this point. So I'll just describe something that's still ongoing that you're all aware of. I may have to use the F word again. Sorry. But it's a story that could have led to a cataclysmic outcome. And it's a story that is hopefully being resolved reasonably. But essentially it is this group of sci-fi actors, some of which are good, some of which were just crappy but not malicious, and some were pretty evil. And we had very sophisticated, some of the smartest investors in the world condone this work, somehow not do deep diligence, and fund activities that were shockingly exploitative, and that's not even some of the illegal stuff. So essentially, the thing that's really remarkable about the FTX debacle is that either a small, smart group of kids managed to perpetrate a very broad, complicated scheme on a nation state and a world, and I'm referring to the US in addition to the other nation states that they made use of. And they're trying to insinuate themselves into power in the US, or there's something bigger behind them, and I'm curious to understand what really happened there. But we actually got pretty close to having our ecosystem thwarted or co-opted if SBF was able to get regulation in his favor, or shore up some of the holes in the balance sheet that were in existence for quite a while and grew more recently. If there was an upswing in our ecosystem and their balance sheets solidified, we could have had a decade or 2 decades of unpleasantness. The technology is so powerful, I'm confident it would win in the end, but it may have been a close one.
So maybe one question, we have time?
Thank you. I really enjoyed this session. You briefly mentioned AI in the future of blockchain, so I'm curious, I'd like you to elaborate on that and tell me how AI, ML can the interdisciplinary between AI and ML and blockchains.
Sure. So two pieces. One, I've been reading about intelligent agents for maybe 40 years, and the technology was always sort of a toy set of experiments. But now we have real autonomous software. We have autonomous software that can be imbued with intelligence. We have autonomous software that can enter into agreements and pay and get paid and vote and be voted on. And so I think we're going to all have intelligent agents monitoring the increasingly decentralized web and doing our bidding. The other piece is that we have these new GPT related deep learning AI ecosystems, and they consist of a bunch of different components. They consist of hardware infrastructure and data and models being built and models being built on top of models and businesses being built on models, and that's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that if it gets really good and powerful, it should operate with transparency, and it shouldn't be controlled by a narrow set of actors. And so I'm hoping the governance technology that we're building in our ecosystem and tokenization can, so it's gonna be an arms race, an AI arms race, but hopefully it's a much more transparent group-governed arms race.
If I may add a little bit to that. So there are lots of exciting applications of AI, as I'm sure everyone is aware now. Until now, to blockchains, that technology did not really have a huge impact. And in fact, most of the things that I saw at the intersection of AI and blockchains were fairly primitive. One of the main things that I see is the uniform integration of computation components with financial flows and business flows. So that becomes seamless, and suddenly you end up having AI agents being able to affect changes on the blockchain of title, of ownership, of money, etc., or of data. And so that's a huge change. And just to sort of pique everyone's interest and give you an idea of what might happen, I want to refer you to the work of Primavera de Filippi, who's been working in the space of both blockchains and social sciences. And she ended up building these ginormous mechanized plants. They're about 7 meters tall. And the plants are autonomous on the blockchain. And unlike robots, etc., that we all might own someday, these things actually are autonomous. They own people, they rent them as their caretakers, and when they need to be moved, the robot makes the decision to, for example, go to Burning Man. I'm sure Primavera did not have much of a hand in that, but you can see that we're moving towards a world of agents where those agents can suddenly have resources to get tasks done, and it's a very exciting world.
So before I'm going to hand it over to closing remarks by Owen Katz, VP of Engineering at StarkWare, let's have a round of applause for OG blockchain founders, Professor Emin Gün Sirer and Joe Lubin. Thank you.